Good evening. Welcome to Inside Out. I'm Pat Smith, and this is where we take you inside state, local, and federal government to bring information out to you. Helping me do that tonight is freshly retired Chief of the Montgomery County Police, Tom Manger. Chief, welcome.
Good to see you. Good
to have you back. 15 years, a long time for a Chief of Police here in Montgomery County.
Yes, it is. If you look at the history of police chiefs, actually in the country, but certainly in Montgomery County, average tenure is like 3 or 4 years. So 15 years was a long time, and total of 42 years as a police officer. So that's a pretty good run, I think.
How many years were you chief over in Fairfax County?
6 years in Fairfax and 15 years here.
And that's not, it's almost the longest serving chief of police in Montgomery County, correct?
Almost. Chief McAuliffe has me beat by 1 year. He was the chief of police for 16 years, I think from about 1959 up through the 70s, and he beat me by a year.
Yeah, he was the first chief of the Montgomery County Police.
Actually, the first chief was back in the 20s, but he was certainly was the longest serving.
Yeah. So there's a big rage right now as a result of the last campaign and the legislation that's been filed by newly elected council member Jawando, all about transparency.
Right.
And what is your feeling of that? What do they think is being hidden?
Well, I think that the perception is from some folks in the public that when you have an officer-involved shooting, that you have a police department basically investigating its own. And, you know, they worry about the objectivity of that investigation. And I understand that. In fact, back in 2015 or 2016, I actually had conversations with the police chief in Prince George's and the Maryland State Police Superintendent about assisting us in some of these cases. If it was a controversial case or if it was something where I thought that it would be better to have an outside investigation done. Unfortunately, it's much easier said than done. I mean, people look at it and say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. But the logistics and the mechanics of actually making it happen are much more difficult than people understand. And so this is my issue, what I've tried to work with Councilmember Jawando and the council on explaining what the difficulties are and what some of the downfalls and unintended consequences are of this bill. I think transparency and objectivity and having outside eyes review the investigation, all good things, all things that we're doing now, but having someone else take responsibility for the entire investigation, very difficult to make that happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. The state's attorney's office, though, it defers. It has Howard County, has an agreement with Howard County, and they investigated the most recent officer-involved shooting death, and that was the Robert White case. And the state's attorney from Howard County came in and investigated and found there was no criminal activity.
Right. Actually, we've actually had one since then, one in Silver Spring, where an individual tried to rob a bank and then had an explosive, and that had an officer-involved shooting there as well, just earlier in 2019. But the Howard County State's Attorney has an agreement with John McCarthy, our state's attorney, to review these investigations. And what I think it's important for the public to understand is that they don't just review what we've done. They actually will conduct their own independent investigation, in that they conduct their own interviews. They'll look at what we've done and say, well, we want you to do more here, or want you to redo this. They are the ones that get the reports from the medical examiner's office and the forensic analysis reports. So what the Howard County State's Attorney does is very independent, and they're not just looking at what we do and saying, okay, well, this looks fine. I mean, they are doing a very independent review of it. And so they looked at, they have looked, I think they've done probably 4 or 5 of our use of force investigations, deadly force investigations over the last few years. And I think it's a good system. our state's attorney reviews the deadly force cases from Howard County. So it does give that objective look, it does give those independent eyes on that investigation. It allows them to do more. It allows them to take the case to a grand jury if they think that's appropriate. So there's a lot of independent oversight of these investigations, and that's the way it should be.
Okay. There's also a call by, again, Councilmember Giwando, and all of the other council members joined him in a letter that he wrote to County Executive Elrich, asking that the selection of the new chief of police increase the amount of transparency in that process. My recollection was that there was quite a bit of transparency in the process for hiring you 15 years ago. And
yeah, but it's something I think that the public wants to be able to have some influence on. I mean, the police chief in any jurisdiction is a significant role to play in a community, and I think that the public wants to have some input in terms of what qualities they feel are important. Look, ultimately, the county executive has to be the one to select the individual. I mean, you can't leave it.
Right.
It's not an elected position, so the county executive has to be the one to make that selection. However, if he or she gets a lot of input from the community, hears from the public what's important to them in terms of what they want from a police chief, the county executive can consider all that. And I know that Mr. Elrich is doing that. He's put a number of community surveys out. He put a survey out to, within the police department, asking some folks in the police department what their opinion was. But I know he's put it out to the community as well, asking folks about what qualities, what's important to them in terms of the next police chief selection. And then once it's, I think the way they have it planned is that once they narrow it down to a handful of candidates, they will have open forums with the public to allow members of the community to meet the candidates, to talk to the candidates, and then they can give their opinions and views to the county executive, again, to help Mr. Elrich guide him in terms of making the selection for the next police chief.
Are we anticipating any applicants from within the department itself?
I believe that there are two. I have 4 assistant chiefs. 2 of them have already announced when they're going to retire, so they're not putting in for it. But I have 2 other assistant chiefs, Laura Lanham and Marcus Jones, who are, in my view, terrific. I think they certainly are capable of doing the job. They are interested in doing the job and have applied to be the next police chief. So we'll have 2 internal candidates. I also know that we've got a number of candidates from around the country that are very good as well. So one thing I'm certain of is that Mr. Elrich will have good people to select from when he looks at the next police chief.
Okay. Now, in the discussion of transparency and all, people keep saying community policing. I don't think that there's a real comprehension of what community policing is. I mean, it's not a method, it's a philosophy.
It's exactly what it is. It's a philosophy. And
Yeah.
I think that folks think that somehow community policing means they get to tell the police how to do their job. Well, look, any good police department is going to listen to the community, and I spent 15 years here listening to the community, and that helped guide me in terms of establishing priorities. But in terms of how to run a police department, that's the police chief's responsibility. And if you don't like the way the police chief's doing it, the county executive, with the stroke of a pen, can get a new police chief. And so, they, as Mr. Duncan, Mr. Leggett, and Mr. Elrich have all told me, said, look, I expect you to run the police department and do it the right thing, the right way, for the right reasons. And so that's what I tried to do during my tenure here. But in terms of the community policing, I mean, what that really means is that you listen to the community, you understand that when you are delivering police service, that you're trying to do it in a way that makes sense to the community. But the big part of it is the partnerships you create. I mean, one of the things that any police chief will tell you is that if you don't have the trust and confidence of the people that you're serving, your job's a lot more difficult. Right. So much of what we did in terms of our community policing was outreach to the community. That is, partnering with them on problems. If we had a problem with gang activity in a particular local park, we could just go in and try to handle it ourselves, but we partnered with the Department of Recreation and with Park and Planning and with the homeowners association in that neighborhood. I mean, there were a lot of partnerships that were developed so that we could have a strategy that wouldn't just chase them away and chase them somewhere else, but would actually solve the problem and make that community safer and make the park safer.
And so our viewers, I hope, that's a great explanation on the partnering. As to what community policing is. A lot of people think it's just having more cops on the beat, walking around in neighborhoods, and there just isn't, there aren't the resources for that type of policing. You're
exactly right. I mean, people will see, like down in Silver Spring and Bethesda, some of our urban areas in Wheaton, they'll see police officers on bikes and they say, oh, that's community policing. Well, it's what it is we've tailored the best sort of approach to delivering police service in those congested urban areres. Putting cops on bikes makes sense. It wouldn't make sense for me to have somebody on a footbeat out in Poolsville. Those programs aren't necessarily community policing. The community policing is really that strategies that you employ to make the community safer, the partnerships you create to allow the community to have some influence on how policing is done in their area. So if you do that and you do it with everything, that you build in that, you look at a crime problem, you say, okay, well, here we got a strategy to try and address that crime problem, but you allow the community to have some input with that. That's part of community policing, instead of just saying, well, we'll just do it the way we think is best. No, why don't you listen to the community and hear what what their concerns are and incorporate that into your strategy. That's what we've tried to do, certainly during my tenure as chief here. And I know that the folks, the commanders and the folks that are running this police department understand the value of that strategy and that philosophy, and that'll continue for many, many years.
Right, so that's in place already.
Absolutely. Look, if some of the things that we're doing, we were only doing because I was chief, and as soon as I leave, they stop, then I didn't do a very good job. I mean, a lot of the things that we did, which I think are really progressive with this police department, are strategies and policies that will remain on for years to come, because they were the right thing to do. And it wasn't all about, oh, look how smart Manger was. It was about, look, this is the right thing to do for this community. It makes this community more safe, and those are things that we need to sustain going forward.
And a lot has changed during your 15-year tenure. I think one of the most significant ones is that they moved the police headquarters off Research Boulevard, which was a building that had outlived its service, for sure. I would go there as an attorney to the evidence room to view evidence, and it was just, people on top of people.
It was pretty sad, and the police department had grown, and in fact we were spending the taxpayers' money leasing buildings because there was not enough room in police headquarters. And so when we moved the headquarters out to the building on Edison Park Drive, we were able to bring everybody back into police headquarters, saved a lot of money in terms of leasing, the space, because everybody was in the building that we owned. And it really has, I think, made us much more efficient, and I'm very, very pleased that for the last, I guess, 5-6 years that we've been in that building, and it's created a lot of efficiencies for us that have benefited the public.
The only thing that I find particularly inconvenient is that the 1st District moved off of 7 Locks and moved into that building as well. It has its own little wing there.
It does, and you're not the first person to say that. I mean, I think people like the fact that that we had a police station on 7 Locks Road. Basically that was a decision made because that space, that land on Seven Locks, they had more important things there that made more sense to have there, and we had the opportunity because we had the space in the building to move the first district, but you're not the first person to tell me that.
All right, it's time for us to take a quick break. We'll be right back. We want to talk about what you've done with the National Chiefs of Police of Big Cities Association, and also what you're going to be doing now.
All right, thank you.
I'm Pat Smith. You're watching Inside Out. We'll be right back.
We just finished dinner and it was time for homework. He hates homework. I know he's bright.
Why is it so hard for me?
He's
I'm
just
trying
gotta
as
try a
hard
little
as
harder.
I can.
1 in 5 children struggle with learning and attention issues. Go from misunderstanding to understood.org.
Welcome back. You're watching Inside Out. I'm Pat Smith, and this is where we take you inside state and local federal government to bring information out to you. Our newly retired chief of the Montgomery County Police, Tom Manger, is with us. Chief, you are very much involved nationally with the Big City Chiefs of Police Association. In fact, did you become the president of it?
I did. The Major City Chiefs Association is an association of the largest cities and counties in the United States and Canada, and we formed an association back in well, I didn't, but the association was formed back in 1949, and it has grown in size and in influence over the years. In 2015, I was elected the president of that association, and spent actually elected for 2 terms, the 2 two-year terms. So it was January 1st of 2019 that I finished my 4-year tenure as the president of the Major City Chiefs Association.
And what is their role?
So this association, and when you think of the jurisdictions like New York City, Los Angeles, Detroit, Houston,
Chicago,
all those, Philadelphia, and Montgomery County is among those large jurisdictions. There are some issues, crime issues, and just issues in terms of running a police department that are all familiar and all very, sort of identical in all these jurisdictions. And we found value in terms of meeting, talking about the strategies that were working in a particular city, and we all sort of learned from that. And we also, as a group, as an organization, found that we could influence things in the right direction in terms of progressive policing policy on Capitol Hill, at the White House, with the Department of Justice, if we had a collective voice that they heard. And when you have the police chiefs from the 70 largest jurisdictions in the country, which account for over half the nation's population, they listen. And so we were able to influence a lot of critical issues in terms of firearms violence, in terms of opioid addiction, and you could just go down the list of national crime issues and safety issues. And we were able to give a progressive voice to what the federal government could do to help ease some of those crime and safety issues.
And that segues right into what you're going to be doing now. What are you going to be doing now?
Well, the reason I retired was because an opportunity came along that I felt was too good to pass up. The gentleman that has been the representative for this Major City Chiefs Association, our representative in Washington, D.C., is retiring. And he did that job for 20 years or more. And he actually came to me last fall and said, I'm retiring, I'm moving back to California. He said, you need to take this job. And I talked to him at length about it, talked to the executive director of Major City Chiefs, and found that it was going to be a nice fit for me. I mean, I'm in the D.C. area. As the president of Major Cities, I was down on Capitol Hill and at the White House for the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the current administration. I've been working with the Department of Justice for many, many years. So I actually have the established relationships. I know what the issues are. I can certainly speak from a lot of experience on behalf of chiefs from around the country, and I thought this is something I can do. And the advantage for me, I guess, or the appeal for me, was that it's not a 24/7 job, which I've had for the last 21 years.
Right.
It's not as stressful. It's not as time consuming. I'm not going to be out, every night of the week and working all weekends. Nobody's going to be calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning. So it's very appealing in that regard. And in terms of doing something that I find meaningful, doing something that I still have a passion for, and remaining in the profession in a role that will allow me to influence it in the direction I think it should be going. If I could have designed the perfect retirement job, this was it.
Here you go. And it's still a full-time job. It's not like a 24/7, as you said, but
it's keeping me busy already. I mean, busier than I really thought. I got a call yesterday about from Congressman Trone's office, and of course I know Congressman Trone because of being chief here, and he was calling about a bill that he was going to sign on to, and said, "What's the major city chief's view on this bill?" And it had to do with grant money going to law enforcement agencies to try and battle opioid addiction. And it's something that the major cities what came out in favor of when the bill was introduced last year, but it didn't go anywhere. So they're trying to get it done this year. So it was really nice being able to work with Congressman Trone's staff and give him information that would help him in terms of his support for this legislation. But again, I'm looking at the new bill. I'm sort of analyzing it, making sure that nothing's changed from last year. Is this something that is consistent with our position? And all of these things are going on. I'm making phone calls, and I'm thinking, okay, well this job's not going to just be sitting back and reading legislation and going, yeah, we like this, we like that. There's a lot of work involved. So, but it's work I enjoy, and it's work that I think is meaningful.
Wonderful. What kind of staff do you have?
You're looking at the staff.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. But that's the Major City Chiefs has always been an organization that allowed the chiefs to be the voice. And I guess the advantage that I have is that having been a chief for so long, I'm going to be able to not only advise the chiefs on different things and facilitate our relationships with all the federal partners, but when it's needed, I'll be able to speak for the chiefs as well. And I certainly understand that the president, who is the president took over after I stepped down, was Art Acevedo. He's the police chief in Houston, Texas. Okay. And Art's a great guy, and and I certainly, he is the president. I wouldn't stand in front of him. I mean, he's, he is the voice for the organization. But I know Art's a good enough friend that I can give him a call and say, Art, we got this issue. Do you want me to take care of it, or do you want to take care of it? And so I feel very comfortable doing this, and but I'm the staff. So
wonderful. Good luck with it. Where are we on the opioid addiction thing now? Is it slowing down at all? Is it still an explosion?
It's slowing down, but not fast enough. It's still the numbers of overdoses and deaths are still much higher than they were 5 or 6 years ago. So we saw that tremendous uptick over the last few years. It leveled off, and it started to decline a little bit, but we still have a long way to go before I would say that it's not a crisis. It's still, in my view, a crisis in this country, and Montgomery County is not immune to that crisis because we continue to see almost on a daily basis overdoses, and we still have too many deaths. Now, the good news is that I think the approach that law enforcement has been taking over the last few years is to understand that the solution is to addiction issues is treatment. Incarceration does nothing for someone who's battling addiction, and so Our approach, and it gets back to community policing, our approach is a philosophy of, look, we're not going to arrest our way out of this. I mean, the people that are supplying the fentanyl and the opioids, you know, operating these major drug distribution, unlawful drug distribution operations, yeah, well, that's where the focus of law enforcement is.
Right.
But for the folks that are overdosing, we got to get them into treatment, get them the help that they need.
It's just so costly to get into treatment if the families are trying to do it on their own. Is there any, I know the county has the facility up on Avery Road, but there are a limited number of beds. Are there any, in this federal bill, is there money there for building or having more treatment facilities available?
This particular legislation that I was working on yesterday is more toward training, education, and giving cops the ability when they get on the scene to appropriately identify what they're dealing with. But what the issue about not enough bed space has historically been the problem, and that's in my view that's the choke point in dealing with the opioid problem is getting enough bed space and making it affordable to folks that need it. So I know that the county has improved that over the last few years, but that's still, I think, one of the bigger problems that we need to deal with is having adequate bed space for people that want to seek treatment. And then, of course, the other issue is that treatment takes for a lot of people and it doesn't take for others. And there's some folks that struggle with addiction their entire lives, and we need to have a strategy for dealing with those folks too that give them the help they need, you know, through the rest of their life, frankly, because addiction is always going to be a problem.
What's amazing is that there's no geographical area that is exempt. I mean, you can go out to Cumberland and it's ravaging out there, Hagerstown, on the shore. It's just
it's everywhere, and you can't say, oh, it's, you know, this race, this gender, this age. It is everybody. I mean, it's a cross section of our community.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, Senator, we wish you the best of luck, and thank you for your service over the past 15 years. It certainly is a transparent and professional police force that we have here in Montgomery County.
Well, thank you, Pat, and it's been a pleasure. And I think we need to keep the options open. I mean, I may be working on some federal legislative issue that you have an interest in, so don't lose my number. But I have to tell you that you know, you and I have gotten together on this program many, many times, and I appreciate the public service that you're doing, that this program does, in getting information out to this to the folks in Montgomery County. It's vitally important that they hear, you know, really, and I'm speaking on your behalf, the intelligent conversations that you have with your guests, because it's information that I think is so important to this community. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you. That's it for tonight here on Inside Out. I'm Pat Smith. Have a good evening.